Hello survivors and welcome to First Aid Spray, a Resident Evil podcast by fans for fans. This is episode 44 and this time we're going from our first day on the force to the President's favourite agent as we explore the history of one of the series' most enduring characters. This is Profile, Leon S. Kennedy. My name is Sai and joining me on the panel this week, it's up to us to take out Umbrella. It's Fire Button Steve Valance.
Say hello with a guitar. Like, sorry. Yeah.
Where's everyone going? Bingo. Our special guest this episode, the man behind YouTube's biggest Resident Evil channel. From Residents of Evil, it's JJ.
Wow, thank you so much, man. And thank you guys for having me here. I can't wait to have this discussion today.
This is actually, before I get into my usual paragraph that I have to say every episode, this episode is sort of like a long time coming because the very first profile we did was with Tony from Row, which was about Barry. And when we wrapped up, he was like, when you get to Leon, get JJ on. So it's taken like 2.5 years, but
we're here.
This was always the plan, and let's see how it pans out. So this episode of First Aid Spray, like all others, was recorded live on our Discord server. Enter our little world of survival horror now to hear the show early and unedited, as well as join our wonderful community and keep up to date with all the latest news. You can find a link to the server, as well as all of our other social media profiles, at our website, faspraypod.com. You can also help the show by checking out our merch or by supporting us on Patreon for as little as $1 a month, with various tiers, each with their own perks. Head over to patreon.com/faspraypod for a full list and the chance to create bonus First Aid Spray content. So, with that in mind, the housekeeping this week, let's start with some bonus content. It's been a while, but we've crossed over a social media goal of ours. We've got some new Instagram followers, which unlocked the latest Pile of Shame podcast. That has been voted on, and the winning title is Shinji Mikami's The Evil Within. So we will be recording a podcast on that sometime in the coming weeks, which will be available for patrons for a month before everyone else. So make sure to check that one out to find out which member or members of the team has never played The Evil Within before. And still available for Patreons for a couple more weeks before it comes public is Now That's What I Call Survival Horror, our music discussion show. This episode, Kelsey picked his top 10 tracks from Resident Evil 3 Nemesis. It's our longest episode in the series. It's definitely our most controversial, so check that one out, patrons, if you haven't. That will be coming to YouTube in a few weeks. Over on our YouTube, we've had quite a few videos drop in quick succession. We had the 5 toughest Resident Evil unlockables written by our friend from the show and the host of the Element Zero Mass Effect podcast, N7 Lionheart. And then with the Welcome to Raccoon City trailers coming out, which we'll be talking about in the news, I did a reaction to that. And Kelsey took it upon himself to do a 15-minute opinion piece on why Welcome to Raccoon City will be the best Resident Evil film, so check that out if you haven't. So before we rock along, just a couple of shout outs as always with the profile episodes. Thankful to be joined yet again by Distant Memories 1996 with some original writings from Leon's perspective. Just keeping that love going, keeping that relationship strong. He's put together some fantastic stuff, so please look forward to that. Breaking up the discussion in this episode with our good friend. We didn't even audition, I have to say, we didn't even audition for Leon. I was like, this is the person. And Distant Memory said, by the way, have you considered this person? And it was the same person. So it was always going to be Kendo Gunshop in the role of Leon, so look out for those file readings. They're very cool indeed. But let's circle back to our main guest. JJ, as I say, it's been a long time coming. I imagine most people who are listening to this are aware of who you are because Resident Evil has such a massive presence. Most people probably know some elements of your story with Resident Evil, but for those who don't perhaps or need a reminder, take us back. What was the first Resident Evil game for you? How did you get into the series?
For sure. I could go on, for so long talking about it, but I'll try to keep it short and sweet. So Resident Evil 2, the original, is the first game that got me into the series. I was a kid at that time, 1998. I was playing a lot of Super Nintendo, Microsoft DOS. My hero at the time was Batman, right? And, Christmas party came around and I was at my cousin's house with all of my family and they just got a PlayStation and 2 brand new games. It was Metal Gear Solid and Resident Evil 2. And I remember just holding Resident Evil 2 in my hand, being blown away by the artwork and the in-game screenshots on the back, and we're like, what game are we going to play first? We started with Resident Evil 2, and it just blew my mind. Visually, it looked incredible in comparison to any game I've played previously. But just the aesthetics, the city of ruin, the horror of seeing zombies, it was like a huge step for me, and I was fascinated with it. I was terrified, but I couldn't stop playing it. I wanted more, and over time, we would all get together at their house, and we would try to see how far we could get. And I do remember one day at school, my cousins came up to me and they're like, "You're never gonna believe it. We got to a police station." And I was like, "No way." So I went over to their house, and we got to the police station. Thought it was so cool finally getting through the city. You got to remember, we were kids at that time, so it was difficult for us to get to the police station. That was an achievement. And then when we did get to the police station, that liquor, man, that put a scar on my brain. But again, I was terrified, but I couldn't stop playing it. And ever since then, that's what kicked off my love for the Resident Evil series.
What an incredible pair of games to have that
right?
choice between Metal Gear Solid 1 and Resident Evil 2. That's what a year 1998 was. I think RE2, out of all of our guests, I'd love to ask that question because you get so many little, just different slices of story of how it happened. But I think Resident Evil 2 is probably the game that's come up the most. I think
everybody shares that similar story, right? Of playing it with older cousins or friends or family members. And we all share very similar stories, but it is nice to hear how everybody got into the series. And it does feel like, a lot of people came around with Resident Evil 2.
Very appropriate considering today's talking point as well, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Speaking of which, it's somewhat integral in a way, I think, to the story of Resident Evil, because I know, from the outside looking in, I kind of know how Row came to be anyway. I kind of watched it sort of at the early days kind of blossom from where it was. But again, for the people that aren't aware of Resident Evil, how did that all come to be? Okay,
so I remember back in 2012, Capcom first teased at a potential Resident Evil 2 remake. And being, a longtime fan of my favorite game of all time, and how well done the Resident Evil 1 remake was, I wanted to do whatever I could to let Capcom know that, yes, we want a Resident Evil 2 remake. I remember they said if fans ask nicely, we'll do it. And so I hopped on wherever I could. And at this time, I live in a very small town. There's not a lot of Resident Evil fans here. I kind of felt like my love for the series, I would talk about it from time to time with a few people, but there was really nobody to talk to. I had no community. So I hopped online and I found the remake Resident Evil 2 fan page on Facebook. So I joined that, just whatever I could to make my voice louder or just try to help out in getting a Resident Evil 2 remake. But that page inspired me because I seen that there's a very large community online that I had no idea about. So I started my own Resident Evil fan page. And again, this was years ago on Facebook, the Residents of Evil. And over time, making posts, growing the community, finding fellow fans, making friends. The creator of the remake Resident Evil 2 page, Spencer, he actually brought me on as an editor. And, over time, we just tried to campaign to push us, as hard as we could for a Resident Evil 2 remake. And then Resident Evil 7 dropped. And, this is years later after starting the page. I remember completing Resident Evil 7, and I enjoyed Resident Evil 7. But I had this urge to go back to Resident Evil 1. I just wanted to go back to where it started. And I was like, you know what? There's a lot of things I want to talk about. I have a lot of ideas. I want to catalog my experience going back to the beginning. I'm going to start a YouTube channel. And, over time, I started talking about news that was going on with Resident Evil 7, stuff I wanted to see in a Resident Evil 2 remake. And I had friends that were editors on the Facebook page, and then I had friends from other pages and brought them on, and we had a podcast, and it was a great discussion. And then we started, hey, we have such good chemistry together. Why don't we try to play Resident Evil together? So we started with Outbreak, and we realized that was a lot of fun. And then one of the guys, Ali, on the team, he started reaching out to actors and voice actors from the
Right.
series. Yeah, and it just kind of snowballed from there. We were talking about news, we were playing games, we were doing a podcast, we were doing interviews, and it just one of the biggest reasons behind the channel too was I wanted to continue pushing for a Resident Evil 2 remake any way I could. So now that I was doing videos, I started making videos about the Resident Evil 2 remake to build hype and attention to it. And I remember the day that, the We Do It, like, completely blew my mind. And then the day that we finally got that trailer at E3, I believe 2018, that was a highlight of my life, I guess you could say. I was just like, all those years of campaigning, and it's finally happening, and it was just amazing.
Yeah, snowballing's definitely the word, because I remember just seeing how quickly everything came together with Row and how it just going from strength to strength to strength, And we've had a lot of guests on the show from the community who are really, old guard. We're talking websites and forums and stuff. And some of that stuff was dying out. Like you say, there was a community out there that was maybe a little bit lost. And that kind of the era that you're talking about, there was a space there for YouTube to sort of be the direction to funnel some of that. So obviously there's like a big gap in the market there that Resident Evil just really honed in on. That I think in the grand scheme of things, it's kind of inspired a lot of these old guard, or these websites, a lot of these community members to sort of come back more inspired to create more. Whether that's just inspiration way or like a friendly competition way. And we're in a strange way, Resident Evil has led back a lot of people to sort of like the online Resident Evil community. And, we say it all the time on the show, I think, that the Resident Evil online community is in such a good place now because there's so many great different places like First Aid Spray, like Resident Evil, Crimson Head, Resident Evil Podcast. We could go on and on. Biohazard Declassified. And generally speaking, everyone's really friendly with each other, which is great. It's a generally fairly positive place, and it's good just to see everybody making cool stuff.
I agree. It's definitely, like I said, there was always that wanting to be part of a community, and finally going online and seeing, it's crazy because even to this day, I'm learning how vast the community is online, and the forums and the pages, and to see that resurgence of fans coming back online and being stronger than ever. It's just amazing. It's truly an amazing experience, and I'm very grateful to be part of this community.
Agreed. Okay, so JJ will be joining us for the main discussion all about Leon, but in the meantime, Steve and I will be going over the hot breaking news.
So our first piece of news, dear listeners, is that not one, but two Resident Evil Welcome to Raccoon City trailers have dropped.
It's about time, isn't it? We were... go ahead.
No. We, as YouTube viewers will have known, Si's already reacted to one of them, but I'm curious as to their thoughts of the full package now.
There's a lot of... I think a lot of people are leaning in the direction of that second trailer. The first one was very action heavy, very quick, had your typical... I think I said in my reaction, but I didn't really get into it. But I've been over the whole take a pop song, slow it down thing for a trailer for the last 10 years. So at this point, it's just like, we're still doing this. So I wasn't massively a fan of that sort of presentation. A lot of people like the second one because it's slower, it sort of meters out the plot. It definitely gives us an idea that Claire almost feels like she's going to be the main character, or get a lot of screen time at least. So, I liked both of them. Definitely, but I think people generally they're right when they say that second one feels more appropriate. Obviously, we haven't seen the film, so we don't know that for sure, but that's more of what I'm expecting and hoping for. Out of the two, what's your preference?
Oh, the second trailer. As much as the first trailer immediately reminded me of that He-Man meme where he sings there, yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Overall, pleasantly surprised. I fully expect this to be a bit of a mess, but the heart is very much in the right place, I feel. And yes, there's a nice juxtaposition to Infinite Darkness, where if we're being nice about it, Claire was only gently sidelined. She appears to be the central focus of the film, which I think is a nice recompense. I think that, generally speaking, she's generally up there, right? Like, it's hard to rank all the characters versus each other, but I feel like Claire probably gets a little bit more of a shout out in the fandom than Jill. But that's just probably the fandom I interact with, at least. Generally the fandom I interact with, it tends to be Chris and Claire are always up higher than Leon and Jill, which is ironic considering the poster characters who are in Dead by Daylight were, of course, Leon and Jill.
That's a very good point. Very good point.
No, I don't expect it to be faithful. When they said that both RE1 and RE2 were going to be combined into a film, I fully expected it to not be a faithful adaptation, as long as it's in the right direction and we don't have an AI spouting about they're all going to die down here or my name is Alice over and over and over again. And instead, we've got the Spencer Mansion, we've got the RPD, we've got characters we know and recognize in terms of their names and appearances. That's pretty sound. I don't even expect like a full one-to-one with them. Just the fact that these people are like the people we know. It could be complete tosh, but it's like the first Doom film, for example, or many other video game adaptations where they make the cardinal sin of not having characters we know as the principal thing.
Right.
That is already, it's already a leg up on that, and then we've got the sets as well. Yeah, if we get somehow, and this is pure pie in the sky thinking, if we get any like embellished like covers of Resident Evil tunes at any point, like if we get some variation of second malformation of G, I may or may not be able to get peeled off the ceiling for weeks.
I hadn't even thought about that. That's a fantastic point. I hadn't even thought about the score, but it's funny. Stars Tyrant, our friend from Resident Evil podcast, tweeted out there is a like a fan art thing going on related to the film in some form. I'm not sure what it is, but basically it's like a competition, and I think they might even use your image in like some kind of marketing way. But among all the rules was like, if you're going to use this character, you must use this character as well. If you're going to this many characters, you have to include these ones, and so on and so forth. A little bit weird, but I'm sure it makes sense if you're in the marketing thing. But don't worry, dear listeners, the last rule was do not feature Mila Jovovich. That's what it said. So
stipulation.
If you're expecting Alice to come flying through a mansion window to save the day, I can, say for certain that's pretty much not going to happen. So that's nice at the very least. I was talking to Sherwin about this, and I think you're right. It's going to be, the story remains to be seen. It's going to be a bit of a weird hodgepodge. What the pace is going to be like is obviously up for debate, because the runtime is like it's like an hour 45 or something. It's not a long movie, so to squeeze everything in is going to be something. But just from the trailers alone, it does look fun. I just want it to be fun. And the Easter eggs, it's going to be a tour de force of Easter eggs. People are already putting out stuff about how a particular painting behind Chris is the Sword Key painting from Remake. Is it Sword Key or is it Shield Key? One of the ones.
It's the mansion puzzle with a clock to get the mansion key for the upstairs Shield Key.
Yeah, it's a Shield Key. Yeah, from the dining room. Obviously the Ashfords briefly in it, and there's a trailer breakdown with the director who said we have used in-game footage just briefly in that, which is really cool. Batman pointed out that the Lisa Trevor file that you see about her briefly in the trailer has all the correct dates and years on it. So that's very promising in terms of that kind of stuff. So if you want something that is made with love, I think this is definitely going to be it. Obviously, the question about quality, we won't know until it comes out. We do have a date now for certain. They wouldn't put a trailer out if they weren't pretty much married to this date. So let's hope it doesn't shift. November 24th in the US. And it looks like, according to various news sources, that we'll be waiting a little bit longer. It looks like December 3rd in the UK, which is a shame. I don't understand it, but I guess it's not the worst thing in the world. That is only, a week and a half or something, isn't it? So it's not terrible.
This film could be just 4 cosplayers going to a Resident Evil themed theme park at this point, and it already looks like it's going to be more enjoyable for me. There's a little bit of CGI that's putting people off and stuff, which is fine. I get you, crap special effects and draw people out. But if they're doing enough practical stuff, it will hopefully balance that. But other than that, kind of good. We're probably going to wait until December. Yeah.
Let's just hope we can avoid, seeing too much about it. Of course, there's only so much you can do. We're obviously on our end, seeing that most of us are from the UK, we won't be sharing anything from the film on our socials once it's out, until it's out, at least in the UK, if not everywhere else, if there's a later date to come. So don't worry, you won't have to worry about us doing anything that might spoil your fun if you're UK bound or anywhere else. We will be hesitant to share that kind of stuff, mostly because I sure as hell don't want to see it.
And our second news story. Steamforged Games Resident Evil the board game. The Kickstarter goes live on October 26th.
Yeah, it's very exciting times indeed. Make sure you head over to... I'll put a link in the description. Make sure you head over and click follow on that one so that you can be notified of when it goes live. If you haven't been keeping an eye out on Steamforge's social media or the website, there is blog posts going out at the moment every week or so to sort of explain what's new about the game, how it changes it up from the last two. There's some cool new features there. I won't talk about it too much because, you know, we've got a full podcast to get into. But there's some stuff there that's going to make it as true and characterful to RE1, in particular the remake, as the previous two games were for RE2 and RE3. So it's definitely been thought about on that end, sort of separating it from the others and making it feel true to that game. But yes, make sure you're following the Kickstarter and follow along with us for the whole entirety of the Kickstarter, because there's a rather exciting thing with... It's unique, and we're going to be trying something. It's almost going to be kind of like a choose-your-own adventure, where over the course of the Kickstarter, the backers will be invited to make decisions about exploring our very own narrative adventure of the Spencer Mansion, where we'll be going from room to room and hopefully looking out for members of STARS to save, and hopefully we'll save... Well, we can only save so many, let's put it that way. So some bodies will have to die, but depending on who you save, that will affect the content of the game. You won't be missing out on anything, there'll just be more advanced characters, which is something brand new that we've never done before, and I'm really excited to see that sort of community. Obviously, us at First Aid Spray have been very involved with the board games and also the community of the board games. It's going to be cool to see them engage with that. I don't, again, want to dwell on this too much, but I've used the word we specifically there because I haven't necessarily worked on RE1, but within the last couple of weeks, if you haven't seen on social media, I have taken a role at Steamforged Games, which is very exciting. So, yes, join us on Kickstarter. I will be there in the comments, hopefully answering all your questions as best I can, and leaving teases where I can as well about that game. Obviously that's going to affect how we cover it, but we certainly will be doing something on the channel to show off RE1 the board game down the line, I'm sure. Hence why I don't want to talk about it too much right now.
It's fine. I'll just turn around and say that as someone who is more of an outside observer in this whole situation, it's all looking rather good. And I like the idea of an ARG being built up on the Kickstarter game as a meta game to kind of affect how the game develops. I think that's really fun and kind of kooky in a good way.
I expect it will go down well, so hopefully people will join us for that. There's definitely some cool stuff to show off coming.
I say one last thing. I want to just at some point I have to sit showing down and just ask straight out, is their real favourite character Brad Vickers? Because they will now have been playable in every single one of these games from the look of things.
Yeah, this is the Brad Vickers trilogy. It's official. All right, well, that takes us nicely into the main topic of discussion for this episode, which is Profile Leon S. Kennedy. And now, reading original writings by Distant Memories 1996, who you can follow on Twitter at DistantMemory96, in character as Leon Scott Kennedy, Kendo Gunshop, who you can find at youtube.com/Kendo Gunshop.
The dying of the light is just the darkness screaming back at you. A mysterious phrase of unknown origin deep in the memories of my mind. It sounded like something out of a late-night horror film or some unwritten mystery novel. The words echoed in my mind as I drove down the eerie, desolate stretches of highway that one summer evening in 1998, as I made my way to what was going to be my first night as a police officer for the Raccoon City Police Department. I wasn't about to get all freaked out over some random creepy phrase. I didn't scare easy, and for the line of work I had signed up for, keeping a cool, level head on your shoulders in the face of danger was practically part of the job description. They always told us at the academy, no matter how good things appeared to be going during your time on the force, above all else, expect the unexpected out there. The dimly lit lights, coupled with humid air and patches of fog coming off the road, mixed with the dark sky above, made the lights from my Jeep seem almost like a ghost passing through in the dead of night. The words of that seemingly simple phrase would come back to haunt me in the end. Upon entering Raccoon City and the events that played out over the course of that horrific incident, I suppose the darkness did scream back at me, and in that dark were ragged, bloody teeth waiting to take a bite out of me. I'll never forget those streets that looked like hell itself had ripped right through them. The deathly emotionless faces of those who were once human, only to become something less than. And the unspeakable horrors that waited for me around every corner of that city. I guess what they say is true, and that the road to hell is often paved with good intentions. There was a part of me that wanted to believe that, but all of that was torn away and only left a broken shell in its place that many once called their home. I thought that by the time I arrived at the Raccoon City Police Department that I'd be safe, but I'd soon come to find out that it had fallen at the hands of the same virus that had swallowed the city whole, and in some cases, it was the most dangerous place of all. The fleeting conversation I had with one of the few surviving men left alive, a brave officer who would have been my lieutenant but gave up the ghost in the end, was proof enough to me that no one in that town knew what was in store for them. Not even when hell itself showed its wicked face and broke loose from its chains into the open streets. I remember the walk down the RPD's first floor, west hallway, and my encounter with an uninvited house guest on the ceiling that came in the form of a wicked crimson jackal with huge claws and a razor blade tongue. Somehow I was able to put that thing out of its misery, only to hear what I thought was more of them in the ventilation shafts above. The screams those things made was deafening, even as my last shotgun shell blasted its face to pieces. The remainder of the hallway was an eerie remembrance of where a fight for survival had died out well before I got there. The shattered windows were all boarded up, covered haphazardly in thick pieces of wood and anything else not nailed to the floor, in the hopes of keeping the dead from bursting inside the station. The floor and walls were smeared with dried blood and empty shell casings telling a grim aftermath of a battle lost in fear. A door down the hall that led to an area with a small dark room for developing film tucked away below a set of stairs, over the course of that dreadful night became one of the few secure places left for me in the RPD. It's truly a miracle anyone made it out of there alive. And thanks to one of the survivors of that incident, a young woman named Claire Redfield, we just might have a chance at putting an end to the Umbrella Corporation's madness one day.
Alright, so it's profile time. We are now at the point with profile where we've covered characters that have only had so many appearances, and now we're getting really to the big boys and girls of the pool. So with Leon, we've got a lot to cover, so we're going to try and keep it sort of succinct and rolling. Nevertheless, one more shout out. I am going to keep things going, sort of keep the canon in check. We're going to go through in canon order, and between appearances we'll be filling in the gap with the help, of course, from the Batman, from the Resident Evil podcast, ResidentEvilPodcast.com, and his incredible mythology, the most thorough timeline of Resident Evil events on the internet. So shout out to him for some of these slices of lore that I'll be reading. So let's start right off. Leon Scott Kennedy, born in 1977, was interested in the police force from a young age, and after graduating as a cadet in 1998, found himself fascinated with Raccoon City after reading all about the strange murders and disappearances that occurred earlier in the summer. Chief Irons had recently launched a recruitment drive of new officers to ease the growing concerns of citizens, especially as missing person cases were on the rise again. Leon's official start date was September 29th, 1998. However, against his better judgment, Leon found himself attending a party and getting drunk the night before his new job after a sudden breakup with his then girlfriend. Feeling rough the next day, Leon overslept in his motel and was late for his first ever shift as a police officer. When he finally arrived, he found that the town had gone to hell and the streets were crawling with with zombies. He soon met up with Claire Redfield, the younger sister of STARS member Chris, but they were soon separated and agreed to meet at the police station. So we've arrived at Leon's debut, Resident Evil 2. We're specifically going to be talking about the 1998 version, of course, first. The first ever sequel in Resident Evil. It's obviously, that's a lot to live up to, and to get the ball rolling. I know we've said this before in other profile episodes, and in general, but Resident Evil 2 is just such a step up from Resident Evil 1 in so many ways, and characterization is a big part of that because of the bigger story and the themes of the story and the dialogue that everyone is given compared to the really sort of clumsy stuff from RE1. Leon gets to show, we all love Chris and Jill in our own ways, and they're not necessarily bad characters by any means in RE1, but Leon and the rest of the cast, but Leon especially, I think, gets to show a really broad and realistic range of emotion compared to Chris and Jill. And, of course, that's all delivered by Paul Haddad, beloved, the late Paul Haddad. So I think there's probably some extra reverence in this one when we talk about this, I'm sure. But JJ, since you're our guest, how do you feel about sort of the range that Leon gets to show in this game compared to the previous game?
So, I mean, he has an entire character arc in this game, which I think is fantastic. Starting from what's going on in this town to, it's up to us to take down Umbrella.
Right.
It's fantastic to see him kind of throughout the entirety of this game, and the events that take place during this game shape him into who we see throughout the rest of the 20 years plus of Resident Evil games. He's a cop that wants to do the right thing, and at heart he's a good guy, right? He wants to do the right thing. He's naive. It's just a like you said, in comparison to Resident Evil 1, there's a lot more dialogue here. There is character arcs. There's a lot of story to be told, and I don't know what it was, but it's just something about Leon Kennedy as a kid. I really related to him. I looked up to him. He was actually my first actual next to, like I said earlier, it was Batman was my hero, and then all of a sudden I played Resident Evil 2, and I was like, whoa, my mind was blown, and then Leon Kennedy became my hero. I really looked up to the character, and I really respected him. But no, I just feel like it was a fantastic character arc throughout the game, and it really just grew that attachment for the character, just to see him go from rookie cop out of his element to, kind of a badass there at the end. But yeah.
Steve, what do you think of Leon's character, especially sort of compared to what had come previously?
Way more in depth, because Chris and Jill, they come across as at least having some kind of a handle on things at the start of their jaunt in the Spencer Mansion. Leon's obviously very much holding his head above water, what could have done this, and get down, we need to get to the police station, split up, what's going on. And it builds up and builds up and builds up. He keeps meeting people, finding information, and never at any point does he try and let people down. He's always trying to do the right thing, even if he's not necessarily listened to, aid and weight, etc. He's different from his forebears in that he's learning as he's going, but he's always keeping his head above water until eventually he can swim, and then he's kicking the living daylights out of monsters left and right and firing rocket launchers and just generally being a awesome, cool dude. Which was appropriate for 1998 on the PS1 because it was the year of the awesome, cool dude.
It's so true. And I think we talked about this a little bit before, or we have at some stage. The RE1 Chris is, if you're talking about the male choice of hero between the two, in RE1, Chris is kind of goofy.
Yeah. He's
not really, badass, as JJ said. But Leon gets to show a lot more of that. You guys both said this hero, all driven by the sort of heroic ideals of justice and protecting others. But there's, an actual toughness to him in this. He gets to express frustration and anger and sort of a firmness when he's in his police officer sort of role, especially when you're talking to characters like Ben and stuff like that. He's got all of that. He feels so much more human. And of course, that's, that sounds like a knock on RE1. Of course, it's not. That is the team very clearly going, we need to step up in this sequel. And Claire is obviously a fantastic character, and Leon equally so. They really knocked it out of the park. I think everyone talks about him being naive, and that's obviously like a key trait, especially at this point of the Leon story. But I think the toughness is something that, looking back on, and we'll talk about it in RE2 Remake as well, I think, it's something that stood out to me on sort of a look back through the cutscenes of this game, that sort of gets forgotten about. This firmness that he has, this level.
No one listens to him. No
Right.
one listens to him all the time.
Yeah.
Like, no one ever listens to me. They all run off, and then lo and behold, Leon, can you do this? Can you go get Sherry? And others like, why are you going in the streets? They're full of zombies and stuff like that.
Right, it's so unique because so many other characters would be like, get behind me and be the hero. But it's much more complicated with Leon, which actually I guess brings us appropriately to his interactions with others. Steve, how do you feel about sort of Leon's relationships with, the mostly female cast that he associates with, but also, Ben and Marvin and so on?
It's very, to roll in a slightly strange direction, he's very dismissive and not very considerate, I think, of Ben.
Right.
The more he has more concern about Ben as he's dying and dead than he does before at all. He just sees him as a jackass who's locked himself in a jail cell. But when it comes to like Claire, I would argue, no knocks on 2019, but I would argue the relationship between Leon and Claire it feels stronger here than it ever does elsewhere.
Yeah.
And that's due to the fact they've got a radio and they occasionally ping each other. I mean, if I was in that situation, I'd probably never be off the thing. But, it's different, isn't it? You got to deal with zombies. And Ada, this is always a forebear, an issue, rather, with RE2 for me in general. As much as I love it, and it is my favourite Resi game, especially the 98 version, I feel like the relationship with Leon and Ada is a little bit too quick to germinate, especially because the average player these days blitzes through that game in under 3 hours. So it's like they've known each other for 10 minutes, not 2 or 3 hours walking around. But again, I can appreciate the emotional beats and, Paul Haddad's performance, especially in Leon A when they're having the standoff. And, even then when she's laying, quote unquote, dying in Leon B are some of the best, I think, of the entire PS1 era. For just how angry a person can be and how distraught a person can be. I mean, yes, it's a cheesy Ada, but as a whole, their relationship it's a wonderful thing to behold, despite the fact that it's nonsense that's derived from they've known each other about 20 minutes.
Yeah, I think that's like many things in Resident Evil, particularly this title as well. It's influenced by Hollywood, I guess.
Yeah.
You've only got a certain amount of runtime to sort of develop a romance. Of course, it's going to feel a little bit rushed and stuff like that. We probably talked about it when we talked about Ada as well. That's just what it is. But you're right. Like in that time, the range that both of them get to sort of go through together, and Leon are outside of that as well, is great. And Paul's the man. He brought so much to this role. Everyone in this game is brilliant character-wise, but Paul is +1 on top of that. He brings everything at the right time, the firmness, the softness, the wild confusion of frustration of everything that's going on around him, and the fact that, try as he might to help everyone out, he doesn't really have control on anything that's going on. JJ, how do you feel about Leon's interactions with everyone else?
Yes, and going to what you're saying, yes, Paul Haddad, he really made the character, honestly, just, actually talking with him and the amount of time and how he put the character together, going into his performance, it really made Leon who he is. And his interactions with the characters throughout the game, yes, while rushed, and yes, a bit cheesy at times, that's kind of part of what makes, Resident Evil so special, and like you said at the time, it seemed completely like a step up from the original. It didn't seem cheesy at the time. Looking back now, you could say, yeah, it was rushed, but that's part of what I love about the Resident Evil series is that they were going off of a lot of a much more action approach than they were with the original game. So it's much more westernized as far as its the way the game is laid out, basically the structure of the game. But his interaction, first meeting with Claire and then going to Robert Kendo, and then Marvin. Marvin was his aside from the intro cutscene there with Claire, Marvin was his first big interaction, and just him trying to help Marvin when Marvin's like, look, there's nothing you can do about this. You need to go. Just goes to show sort of how Leon's mind, like he's trying to do the right thing. He's trying to be a good cop, and I'm coming back for you. It really lends to his character and gives him more personality. You know what I mean? He's the good guy. And then going through the game, his interactions with Claire, we need to split up probably isn't the best idea, but just sort of their story too throughout the game of working together and overcoming incredible odds. I think with Paul Haddad's delivery of the character and the sort of westernized action mixed with the survival horror, I think it all just kind of came together perfectly to create a very iconic game.
Right. I always read personally into the idea that Leon kind of sees Claire as someone who is capable of taking care of themselves, and that's why he votes for continuing to stay split up, because clearly he's concerned that, and he doesn't know the full extent that we've got to in Raccoon City by this point, but working on the assumption that there's more survivors out there, let's save as many people as we can. Splitting up is the way to do it. So that's my sort of justification. And then just a minor one as well, what you were saying about Marvin. Again, this is just baseless theory on my part, but I always assumed that scene, whilst I'm pretty sure it ends the same way with Leon and Claire, they both get Marvin putting a gun to their head to force them to leave. I'm going to assume that scene was written with Leon in mind first. Because, why wouldn't it be? It's, he's talking to his superior officer and everything like that. And that's what gets Leon to leave. That's the only thing that gets him out of the room. Is, go save somebody else. So that, again, all of that is just the way that I've looked at this. Before we move on, somewhat hastily, but that's the way it's going to have to be, before we sort of take a sideways jump to Remake 2, any final thoughts on RE2? I'm not necessarily asking you to sort of rank them. We will maybe get to that at the end. But any final thoughts on the original RE2?
Yeah, just real quick, just to kind of go to that really fast love story with Ada there and how it kind of played out very quick. I did like that in the fact that he is a young cop, and when he's out of his element, he's trying to do the right thing, he's trying to help people, and then Ada comes along and she's kind of this badass spy. He's trying to be a cop and question her, but she just repeatedly gives him the cold shoulder throughout the game, and it's kind of like that young love where you're in high school or you're just coming out of high school and you fall in love with what you can't have. And it's just, I don't know, it kind of lends to the young, naive cop, rookie cop.
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, not that it was necessarily written this way, but him coming off the back of a breakup literally the night before, he's very, very tender. I'm very, excited that we're probably going to, now that that's canon, I think after the fact, I'm pretty sure that wasn't actually revealed to us at any point around 1998, but now that we know that that's the reason why they justified him being so late, I'm excited to see how that's portrayed a bit, in the upcoming film, because the director has specifically said, he's going to be hungover and stuff like that. That's really cool. But nonetheless, let's take a sideways jaunt over to Remake 2, the 2019 Resident Evil 2. Nick Apostolides as the role of Leon. JJ, I expect that you might be slightly biased in this one, being that he's a personal friend of yours.
Yeah, a bit. One thing, Nick Apostolides, he respects the character and loves the series as much as we do.
Right.
So it was really cool to have somebody play that role that also, is a very talented actor, very professional, talented actor who also loves the character and respects the series like we do. Mm-hmm. And yes, a friend of the channel.
Yes. Let's start, with Nick then. I think it's first the logical place to start is, you're so right. Now we've got to the point where we're getting actors that have experienced the series before, that perhaps grew up with the series like Nick did, that are just so excited to be a part of it. And that's really cool. And, that it shows how, the hard work that they put in because of that really, really shows. I don't think, I can't speak for everyone, but I imagine 90-something% of players of Remake 2 were very happy with Nick's portrayal of Leon. I know we were all very positive about it over here. I've not really heard any bad words said about it, because I think perhaps most important, and obviously we'll talk about Leon's evolving character over the years, but there was definitely some concerns about how they were going to, were they going to get his character right? He's not, as we just talked about, a superhero. He's badass, but there's that naivety and stuff like that. Are they going to be accurately portraying that? And I think writing-wise and Nick's performance, just straight out of the park with it. Steve, how well would you rate Nick's performance as Leon in Remake 2?
I'm definitely in that 97%. I think, Nick is a fantastic dude, and they got it. When someone's like given a role, like, do a new fresh take on Paul Haddad's Leon. And they went, okay, I'll go for it with the reverence and and appropriate candor to it. I love how innocent he comes across in Remake 2. Like he feels even more innocent than 98 Leon. There's no real complaints that I have. I think Nick is really good at what he did. Particularly standout moments for me would be like the stuff with Marvin. And the stuff with Ada, I find like portraying a person who is being manipulated and then overcoming that manipulation is fantastic. The whole "I'm taking you in" drew me a little out, but at the same token, he's upset and frustrated. What's he gonna say? He's a cop,
Yeah, and he's like a 21-year-old as well at this point, so that's what his idea of what he needs to say is, right? So loads of great little moments like that. When you mentioned Marvin, I immediately thought of right at the beginning of the game when he gets pulled out from the shutter, and you can see it in his face and the way that Leon says how regretful he is that he couldn't save Elliot Edward from getting cut in half. Just little moments like that feed into it. It's just fantastic. This is why I mentioned the toughness specifically, and you hit right on it. Despite the fact that now Leon is allowed to swear and swear a fair amount. I think overall, compared to RE2 Classic, he feels a little bit softer overall, despite the swearing. He doesn't quite have that toughness from RE2 98, which is perhaps why it stood out to me, because I actually looked at them side by side. That being said, overall, no complaints. Fantastic, job of bringing Leon back to, his roots. This guy that has known what he's wanted to do with his life for so long, starting his dream job, and then immediately coming to this nightmare and doing his best to look out for everyone involved. And of course, on top of that, it's a little bit easier to see the line between Remake 2 and RE4 with Leon in this, because he's got a few jabs of humour in there. JJ, how do you feel about Remake 2 Leon's character?
I think that Nick Apostolidis did a fantastic young Leon. I honestly think he nailed it. I think the respect he had, the professionalism that he brought to the table, and just all the attention to the small details, right? Yes, he does feel a bit softer, and yes, I think there should have probably been more cutscenes showcasing, his and the other actors' acting chops, basically, because they all did a fantastic job. And that scene with Marvin, oh my god, like between the first scene with Marvin and the original to the scene with Marvin, Christopher is a fantastic actor, and he absolutely nailed it as Marvin. But no, I think that even though the story of this game, some things change, the overall arc of Leon remains the same. He goes from a naive cop that is out of his element and is just trying to do the right thing, I'm taking you in with Ada. It's just a fantastic retelling of the same story. A reimagining, as they would say. And I think that Nick really delivered, and really, while paying respects to Paul Haddad's performance in the original, Nick made it his own, but kept faithful to Leon as a character, that Paul had a really big hand in creating. And I think that level of respect and attention to small details and the professionalism, really, he really nailed it.
Yeah, absolutely no complaints. I don't have a whole lot more to say about Remake 2. So, Steve, any more thoughts, sort of character interactions and performance-wise?
It gets a lot of stick, but I actually really do like the side gate scene with Nick and Steph, where they're like, to me, I just see it as two people who are knackered trying to like cheer themselves up a little before they go back into it. I know people see it as flirting, but I don't know, maybe I'm just missing it all. And I love the little scenes, like the stuff like, for example, he's just seeing the train about to depart with Alan. He's like, he's knackered, he's tired, he's got to keep going. Those small little bits like that, where it's just those little extra touches that I think make him that a little bit more of a rounded person.
Yeah.
No knocking on Paul or Dad, obviously not. But I like the added little embellishments and stuff and development to his character in it. I think it helps a lot.
Definitely.
Agreed.
JJ, any more thoughts about Remake 2?
It was a fantastic remake. I know we're talking about Leon Kennedy in particular. When they showcased it, it was different than the Resident Evil 1 remake. I was very excited, but I was very skeptical. But overall, with the performances, I really enjoyed it, and I really enjoyed Nick's performance as Leon. I don't think I have anything else to add to that.
Yeah, that's fair. I think that, we'll always sing the praise, no matter what you think of the gameplay, perhaps, or changes to the story, so on and so forth. From both of the remakes, the big strength that nobody can deny is stuff like cutscenes and characterization and stuff like that. Just throughout both 2 and 3 has been very, very, very strong. And it's very hard to sort of rank those performances and characters because they're all so good. But I think the casting for Leon was perfect. So certainly no complaints about that one.
One more quick thing I want to add to that, and I'm sorry to jump in here, but Nick has a Boston accent, so I remember, having a discussion with him, like he said, "Quap," with the Boston accent, a lot of things he said, so he had to change some words around so that Boston accent wouldn't come out, and he could deliver it in a way that the directors were looking for. But again, that's he could have just kept the Boston accent, but he chose to pay attention to the small details and change things up. I don't know.
There you go. That's the bias that I was talking about.
Okay. Is that?
No. I'm kidding. Yeah. No, you're totally right. You're totally right.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So let's move onwards. As I say, we're going to do this in canon order. So next up is a bit of a side story. Following the events of Raccoon City, Leon met an official named Adam Benford who wished to recruit him for a soon-to-be-established secret military agency designed to look into the existence of biological weapons. Leon accepted the offer in exchange for the assurances over Sherry's ongoing safety. The Raccoon incident also left him with a profound hatred for Umbrella, and he wanted further opportunities to take them down. Leon began a rigorous training program to prepare for his new role, and he rarely spoke of the Raccoon City incident. The only person he would really open up to was Adam Benford, the man who recruited him. Leon found Benford shared the same hatred of biological weapons as he did, and this shared interest led to them to becoming friends. In the ensuing years, the new government administration had laid out their intentions to earn public support and regain trust by taking a firm anti-Umbrella stance. One of these measures was the Antivirus Weapons Protocol number 7600, a directive that afforded Leon a number of special privileges in order to further investigate Umbrella Corporation and eradicate their biological weaponry. As a direct tie-in to this order, Leon found himself dispatched to South America in 2002 to investigate Javier Hidalgo's relationship to Umbrella. Javier was a notorious drug lord and leader of the Sacred Snakes crime syndicate. Leon was joined on this mission by Jack Krauser, a US SOCOM operative. So, of course, this brings us to Operation Javier from Darkside Chronicles, the story that sort of pieces together yet another retelling of Resident Evil 2 and Resident Evil Code Veronica. This is sort of like the interweaving thread, and more than anything else, I think everyone would agree that this was a great title to sort of feed Krauser back into the story after being introduced in Resident Evil 4 years prior. I don't have there is probably a lot we can say about Darkside because it's a rail shooter, so there's not a lot of, not to say there is not a lot of story, but there's not a lot of back and forth dialogue that's particularly intrinsic to that story. It's a railgun game. It's about the gameplay. But nonetheless, we can talk about it a little bit in terms of the performance and Leon's role here. So, Steve, why don't you start us off with this one? What's your thoughts on Leon's portrayal in the Darkside Chronicles side story?
Solid. I would say Paul Mercier does a solid job. It feels like he's trying to be a younger than RE4 Leon, and it shows in a positive way. And I love the almost buddy cop vibe, although admittedly, as we know, it's one-sided between him and Krauser. And he genuinely, on his side of things, he at least gives a damn when Krauser gets hurt, and he's trying to make sure that, for example, Manuela is safe, and he's trying to make sure she doesn't bleed herself to death taking on big baddies, which is like, being a protector, which is, part of his RE4 rule set and moves, shall we say, but it works well here. And I have no real complaints, I'm going to be honest. When it comes to a lot of these, it's going to be like, Steve, what do you think of Leon? He was all right, but in particular, I do appreciate that it's a dynamic you don't normally see with him in this whole, like, trying to look after people and at the same time make sure his colleague is not dying on the battlefield next to him, which, it's pretty good, yeah?
Yeah, it's pretty good. Yeah, I would, JJ, are you in the same camp? It's pretty good.
Yeah, it's pretty good. Actually, this one is difficult for me to discuss for a few reasons. It's one, it's been a while since I played that. I refreshed my memory a bit, but it's hard to talk about his portrayal as Leon without talking about his portrayal with my first impression with Paul Mercier as Leon in Resident Evil 4. I will say, though, that he does carry that same good cop wanting to do the right thing, but he's got a bit more, a bit more experience under his belt, and it is nice to see him going from 2 to this, then into 4, and to see Krauser come back and his interactions with Krauser. It really shows you. It gives you, number one, what they did before and how they knew each other, but number two, kind of why the events of 4 played out the way they played out. And I do think that as a side thing, a canon side game, I think it was great to have that and to get to see and witness Leon, on that mission.
Yes, I agree. Obviously the big part, as we said, is serving to develop that relationship with Krauser more than anything else. But I think, even with the limited script of this game, they did a pretty good job with, as you just said, JJ, kind of putting it in between the two. He's still a bit idealistic. He's still very much looking out for other people. He's not, if you'd like to describe it as sort of confident and cocky, his RE4 portrayal, he's not making the jokes yet. He's not got to that point of comfort, but he has got that more experience. So I wrote down the word, he's kind of more hardened. He's a bit more short with things. He's, taking this new role pretty seriously, obviously, which is, the absolute right direction when you know what his goals are as a character. It slots in really nicely, considering that it is just... it could be described as a bit of a throwaway side game. It doesn't really have to have too much impact. I think they did a really good job with the script. Whether it's intentional or not, it just slides in wonderfully between 2 and 4. And yeah, Paul Mercier did, a good job with what he was given. But beyond that, I suppose there isn't too much to say. But since we're covering everything canon, I at least needed to give it a nod. All right, well, let's move on then to one of the other big titles. This one's going to be an interesting one indeed. So in 2004, Leon's duties were expanded further after his superiors assessed his growing skill set and believed him suited to VIP protection. He received special training via a secret organization working under the direct control of the new President of the United States and was to join the security detail for President Graham's family. But before he could take up his new position, Ashley Graham was abducted whilst on her way home from university. Following extensive background checks, Leon's first assignment was to investigate her abduction and bring her home safely. Because the government feared an inside leak had led to her capture, it was agreed that Leon being sent in alone would minimise further intelligence leaks. Leon was sent to an isolated region of rural southern Europe, or as we like to call it, not Spain, where he uncovered a sinister religious cult known as Los Illuminados. So, of course, Resident Evil 4... Paul Mercier, in his first performance as Leon, he was cast quite early on into Resident Evil 4's production. As we know, when we covered 3.5, he was already portraying Leon when it was, the Hookman build and stuff like that. So this was a long time coming, this game. Before we get into it, talking specifically about Leon's character, JJ, when you played this game for the first time, did Leon's character... How did you feel about that? Was it like it must have, because I'm sure a lot of people felt very similarly and it was a very big change, or did you feel it was kind of natural?
It was very polarizing. I'm going to be completely honest with this, and I'm going to speak on it for the very time that I first played it. When I first played Resident Evil 4, I was obviously very excited. I bought a GameCube for Resident Evil 1 Remake and Resident Evil 4. Got it day one. And just being completely honest, my time first playing that game, I did not like the direction they took Leon. I was very hard on it. I still played the game. I had a lot of fun playing it. It was the first time I had a ton of fun playing a Resident Evil game. But did not enjoy the direction and Leon's character. Nothing against Paul Mercier. It was just the character itself I did not like. But to that, I took a very long hiatus from that game. I actually didn't revisit it. And if you go back to our earlier podcast, I was pretty hard on Resident Evil 4. It wasn't until about 3 years ago where I revisited it, where I absolutely fell in love with the game and Paul Mercier's performance as Leon and how Leon was written. So it's one of those weird cases where I absolutely didn't like it and now I love it. And it's just really weird how, 12 years could completely change your outlook and perspective on a character. So there's a lot to talk about with this one for me personally.
Right. I mean, don't worry, you're among very similar company here. I had the same reaction on release. I've gone on record to say that I was in camp, hashtag not my Resident Evil,
Yeah.
And it's taken a long time to come around to enjoying it and stuff like that. Steve, I know you're a bit, you're a big RE4 fan, so how do you feel about Leon's character?
I can't play any Resi game.
True, but...
This is one that over the years I've kind of just accepted various, not necessarily sensible headcanons to get me through without any divergence in character. Like, I see Leon's quippiness and, shall we say, more snarky personality that is more present in this game than all the others is because he's got a plagger in his neck, because it doesn't really start emerging until after he's already had it injected. But that's headcanon for you. It helps a lot. It smooths over some cracks.
That's what it's for.
Yeah. Overall, I generally like how it builds up and the atmosphere to it, because he starts out, he's just literally got these cops who seem dodgy, aren't very helpful. Like, yeah, okay, sorry to have bothered you. It's like walks into a house and immediately gets accosted by a maniac with a hatchet. And it just spirals from there. And it feels like he goes down on a wild ride meeting strange and crazy people, but he's still polite to them and gets overly attached rather quickly. For example, Lewis and Mike.
Lewis.
Hold on, to that. When you say polite, is breaking and entering into a villager's home polite and then blasting him in the face? I think not. Who's the real villain here?
Who's the real villain?
Yeah. I'm just kidding.
Yeah. No, and I especially really like the standoffs, particularly with the villains. Like, Leon and Krauser, I think it helps with Dark Side Chronicles, but you didn't need that for Salazar and Sadler. Salazar trying to goad him, and Sadler literally taunting him, to which Leon is getting angry. I think it's a nice side to him. And, the cheesy quips, nature of the action game, I suppose.
That's the thing, isn't it? Yeah. That's it stood out. RE4 in general stood out on release for obviously a huge number of reasons, and one of them was Leon's character becoming this sort of 80s action movie hero with bad one-liners and all that stuff. But what's funny is when you make a list of his appearances like I did for this podcast, it still stands out because it's the only time that we really went this over the top with it. Like, okay, he's got some cheeky comments here and there, but this is completely overt. Like, it's kind of difficult because on the one hand, it feels like with the nature and the sort of irreverent tone, if you like, that RE4 is going for, it doesn't really feel like Leon's taking much of this all that seriously. Your right hand comes off. It's like, that's what you say to a cult leader who's trying to enslave humanity. That's a bit odd, making stupid, dumb Obviously, it works in terms of the feeling that the game is going for. Does it work for Leon's character? Not really.
Yeah, it's a very good topic.
It's a very wild turn. It's
he in his charge jumped down a 20-foot hole, and the first thing he's got to say is, "I know you'd be fine if you land on your butt."
Right? Yeah. Even today, there's something to be said about something like Dark Side Chronicles, where you can go and layer in some extra connections between characters and explain some stuff. But there's no way that this never stands out as being a very weird version of Leon. It's likable. It's certainly likable. Paul's performance is a big part of that. There's a real sense of fun to this Leon, which isn't a bad thing. It fits with, like I say, it fits with the game. But when you're coming off the back of like RE2, it is very strange. It will always be very strange.
Yes.
Last Plagueis. I'm telling you, it's the last Plagueis playing with his neurochemistry.
I think doesn't Neptune have like a theory that this is Gaiden Leon? That's why he's so different.
Oh my god, that's crazy.
I'm down for that. JJ, how do you feel about sort of Leon's interactions with, the likes of Ada, Krauser, and the villains in this game?
Yes. So going to now playing it so many years later and falling in love with it. The game itself is it has its own very unique artistic style. And after coming around to it with an open mind so many years later, I've come to love it because not only does the game have its own unique style, and it stands out as it does stand out when you compare Leon in 2 to Leon in 6 and then Leon in 4. It does stand out. But I think that's what makes the game so special and why there is such a huge community of Resident Evil fans around Resident Evil 4. And I do feel like Paul Mercier's performance as Leon fits absolutely perfectly with the theme and art style they are trying to achieve in the game.
Yeah.
Yes, and with that, yes, it is very extreme as far as his personality and the actions are, which again I really do enjoy now. But I do feel like there is a lot of original Leon still in there. There's those moments when you finally see Ada and you're like, oh my god, this is the first time we're seeing them since Resident Evil 2. This just confirms that she did live. It was really cool because you got just a hint of that Leon is still that guy trying to chase Ada, and she still is kind of one step ahead of him, but he's come so far between 2 and 4 where he no matter how cool and badass he has come since 2 and 4, he still is chasing after Ada, and I just found that they still had that chemistry between the two. In the game, I thought that was really cool. But yes, he is full of one-liners, a lot of cringe one-liners that have become iconic to the series, and it really did. It really did achieve what Resident Evil 4 as a whole was trying to achieve, as they were trying to reinvent the series, and it's difficult to say if it was the right move or not because it did, and it sold a ton. We're still getting Resident Evil 4 to this day now coming to VR, and Leon's performance was very of what they were trying to do. So it's I enjoy it very much in its own unique way. I don't know what else I could say to that.
Yeah, that's fair. I definitely see what you're saying about their interactions with Ada. They're nice. My only problem is with the fact that it doesn't further that story, and in fact that's true of pretty much every time we see these characters together, so that's more like a larger subject, right? We finish RE4 in terms of Leon and Ada's relationship kind of where we started, except Leon now knows for certain that she's alive. It doesn't really progress, but it is nice to see that chemistry, and I think he does have good chemistry with pretty much everyone, in terms of the rest of the cast. Steve, how do you feel about Leon's interactions in RE4?
Yeah, aside from rapid onset grief, I've got no complaints. It's generally solid. I especially love, the cheekiness between him and Ada, where they're all like nodding at each other or traveling somewhere in the speedboat and stuff like that, or even where she has to stab him out of his Plaga-based trance, and his first thoughts are, I've still got to save Ashley. It's all awesome. Is it as emotionally moving as, say, RE2 era? Probably not. Not for me, but I still, as a through line, I think it's solid and it's fun. A fun time. I have no real complaints in that regard. That's, like I said, I'm a very broken record already. I've got no complaints about Leon in RE4. I think he's all right. I like the way he sasses the baddies. It may not be a bit sensible, but yeah,
fair enough.
Enjoyable.
That's fair. There's a couple of things that Leon does in this game that kind of irk me. They're just minor things, which overall, so for example, comments about Hunnigan with no glasses, just stupid and unnecessary stuff. And we've joked about it before, the fact that he can't pronounce Luis's name correctly.
Yeah.
But overall, in terms of this like kind of goofy, cocky Leon, he's kind of like this is gonna sound so dumb. It's a bit like a playful douchebag in this. Like it's like okay, it's fine, whatever. Like it fits the whole tone. So
yeah, I think overall, like I said, it really fits what the tone of the game is, what they were going for with it.
RE4 is, once you get over perhaps the initial jitters that it goes for in its action horror style of feeling overwhelmed, it's just a fun game. It's just meant to be a fun game. So Leon in this game being kind of fun, it's appropriate. So overall, I think it fits really well. And of course, as we said, Paul did a pretty good job, stepping up to that. No complaints on this end. Although, don't worry, Steve, I've got some complaints about Leon coming up. So we
Good point.
we won't fill in too much lore between the next one, because really the next few appearances are really just continuation of Leon's exploration, working for the government and the various things that they sent him out to do and so on and so forth. So we're just going to jump ahead a year to the Harderville incident in 2004, I think it was, or 2005, either way. So the events of Resident Evil Degeneration is what we're going to talk about next. Paul Mercier coming back to play Leon in this one, the first CGI film for the series. One of the reasons why Leon's sort of appearance list is so big is that we get to talk about all 4 of the CGI things, with Leon being the lead character in all of them. So Degeneration is first. Where do I start with this one? Steve, is Leon the most boring character in this film?
Yes, by a very, very wide margin, I think, which is strange, because I remember saying on our Claire Redfield profile that her appearance in this is one of my favourites, juxtaposed against easily my least favourite for Leon. It's like they saw the description that badasses must be quiet and succinct, and went so hard on it just hurts.
Yeah, absolutely, completely agree. Flat, boring, lifeless. I'm not sure what happened, if it was the voice direction or something, but Leon, he just sounds bored most of the time. And considering what we just talked about, and this is a year or so after the events of Resident Evil 4, it makes no sense. Like, it's such a massive contrast with RE4, and even what's to come after, which admittedly literally is an appearance that came out this year, I know, but it doesn't help Damnation at all, does it? It doesn't add any life to that film. Cards on the table, out of all of them, I quite like Degeneration. That's got a lot to like in it as an overall product for me. But Leon is just terribly boring. JJ, what do you think? Are you in agreement?
I'm completely in agreement. Out of the canon series, this is my least favorite portrayal of Leon. He is completely lifeless. And I remember being so excited and overall enjoying this movie because, we were coming off the live action movies to something more faithful, grounded. And Claire absolutely kills it in this movie. And it's just so disappointing to see, they're trying to make a star of Leon. He had his quippy lines and everything in Forge, just to come to this and just be a robot.
Right.
I don't like it at all. It's just lifeless. There's nothing really else to say to that other than what happened to you, what hurt you between 4 and this, to where you're just dead inside.
Yeah, it is. And not to put the cart before the horse, but the fact that we're going to be talking about Infinite Darkness, which is not on this level, but it really set a bad precedent for the CGI films, because Damnation, we get this Leon again. So now it's a bit up and down, but I don't know. There's not much to talk about here because there's not much given. I don't know. I don't think it was Paul Mercier's intention. This must be like a voice. I believe this must be a voice direction thing. And I think, Steve, you're perhaps right, is that whoever was in charge of this thought that that's what was cool. This sort of short, just completely lifeless, gritted
and children drops at this point in production time. I know it's not the same franchise, but I like Cloud suffers from a similar thing in that film, where they're quite miserable sods.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, he does kind of have the fringe as well. So
In Leon's defense in Degeneration, there are some admittedly absurd but fantastic action set pieces which set him as a quote-unquote super badass. But that's literally all he's got. Like, he's got a few action flashy moves and parkour, and then the personality of a plank of wood.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, if I'm going to say my one good point about this film in terms of Leon is there's the scene, I think it's sort of around coming up to about the end of the first half, where he's talking to Claire about Raccoon City, and he just puts it out, and almost to the strength of just how flat the script is and how uncomplicated and as simple as it is, but it actually kind of works. His mission statement is delivered no better than here, when he literally says, since Raccoon City, it's my mission to stop the spread of he says that virus, but obviously at this point we're starting to get into the black market territory and everything sort of exploding from here. But I think that says it all about what Leon's intentions are more than anything else. It's my mission to stop the spread of that virus. I thought, that's accurate. That is appropriate for where he is post RE4 and where we go from here with Damnation and stuff. It sets up the rest of appearances from him quite well, but beyond that, I don't have anything else on Degeneration. JJ, any final thoughts?
I really don't think it was at fault of Paul Mercier. He has a fantastic style to the Leon that he's made, and he's great at it. And again, I think this was more of a directive thing. I really have nothing else to add other than maybe Leon was a BOW. And no, I'm just kidding. But no, I have nothing else to add to this.
6 years have passed since that horrendous incident. The events of Raccoon City forever changed my life for the worse. I find myself picking up the pieces along the way, in the hopes that I can one day rid the world from the threat of bioorganic terror. There will always be a part of me that thinks I could have done more for Raccoon City and the people who once lived there during that night of unspeakable horror. There will always be a part of me that thinks there could have been more people that I left behind in that town. They could have used my help to get out of there alive, just as Claire Redfield and Sherry Birkin did. But since the remains of that town are all pretty much burned to ashes, there's no use in beating myself up over the lives that were probably past the point of saving in the first place. I should be thankful that I was able to make it out alive and save the few people I could while I was there during that nightmare. Although it seems that the memory of Raccoon City will never truly let me go. Since that fateful summer back in 1998, I've been having the worst nightmares each night. There's even a few that reoccur every few days. In the dream, it always starts off with me waking up on this ghostly-looking airship, taking me to an unknown location on autopilot before it comes to a sudden stop over a rainy dock by the ocean. This giant airship, which actually looks more like an old Zeppelin from times of war, is always caught in a violent storm. Rain, whipping winds, thunder and lightning. As I make my way down the ship and out onto the dock, I see in the distance a vast mountain path, and at the top sits a gothic castle. It looks like something out of a classic monster movie. But it's when I make my way up the mountain and into the castle that things get even stranger. One instance I've dreamed of at that point is of being attacked by a giant mass of black swirling shadows. And as I take out my handgun to shoot at it, the bullets go right through it. Before it's too late, the shadowy monster swarms all around me, infecting me with its darkness. I wake up with a shooting pain in my arms. Sometimes the swirling shadows don't come, and I find myself wandering the halls of the castle. It feels like an ancient mansion with suits of armor and a wood-burning fireplace alongside a mysterious dining room table set for no one at all. It's in this sequence that I come across murderous toy dolls that maniacally laugh at me as they try to stab me with knives. Or I encounter something far more sinister in the form of a ghostly man of black shadows carrying a sharp hook on a chain. Once again, I always seem to have a handgun in this dream, but the bullets seem to fire blanks and my gunfire does nothing in the way of destroying these monsters of my mind. In both dreams, I hear the words Umbrella and Blue Millennium. I don't know what it means, but the choice in words leaves me stunned nonetheless. I know all of this is just my own fears and doubts manifesting themselves as vivid dreams, but the paranoia in me feels that somehow there is an element of truth to it too. There could still be facilities all over the place from Umbrella that were left unchecked, remain abandoned, and possibly harbor prototype viruses made before their company would completely bankrupt. It's a thought that my mind shudders to think about. One thing's for sure, Umbrella's secrets go deep. The current mission I'm tasked with is one of national security, one of the highest priority of the president himself. According to intel that I've received from my informants, a few days ago President Graham's daughter, Ashley Graham, was violently abducted by a mystery assailant and taken to an unknown location thought to be in a rural part of Europe. The Umbrella Corporation was the devil I knew. In this case, though, I was going in completely blind. My only hope is that whoever they are, I hope they're not in any way tied to them. Umbrella has done enough damage to this world, and my own sanity.
Let's perhaps, hopefully, get a bit more positive with Infinite Darkness, which takes place a year later. I'm sure we've all talked about this at length this year. We certainly released an episode, and I'm sure the guys over at Row covered it as well. So this is Nick coming back for his second appearance as Leon. Again, I don't think there was concerns about it, but there was definitely a lot of interest to see how he would play Leon at this point in his career, jumping from 98 to where we're at now, 2006. I think this is where it takes place. Post RE4 and stuff like that, there was definitely some interest for what Leon's portrayal was going to be. Steve, I think you said it best on our podcast of Infinite Darkness. For me, when you said it's like Leon in a blender. You've got the justice and the duty that you expect. You've got some of the jokes from RE4 sprinkled in there, but he's becoming a little more stern and tough that you would expect to see from, the hindsight of the fact that we've got stuff like Damnation and RE6 after this, we already know. So, kind of in the way that Dark Side Chronicles fits nicely in between those portrayals and as a sort of bridge, I think Infinite Darkness, ignoring Degeneration, works really well between RE4 and Damnation, where he's starting to get just a little bit jaded, but the sort of one-liners and gags are there. JJ, how did you feel about Leon's character in Infinite Darkness?
I feel like this is a perfect complementary to where Leon would be after the events of the Resident Evil 2 remake. It's not as jarring as the difference between 2 and 4. It's like you said, it's definitely a blender of the character. It's showing, Nick's performance and taking in Leon's personality from Resident Evil 4, but while taking his personality that he added to Leon in Resident Evil 2, it is the perfect blend of that to where he has his one-liners, he is getting cockier and more hardened, but it's just a much better bridge, I think, personally, and yes, far superior to what we've seen in Degeneration. But yeah, I think it's not as jarring as 2 going to 4. It's a really well-balanced Leon, and I think that him mixing those two Leons, I think he really did a great job. Kind of, how would I say it? He did a really good job putting them together, I think, and showing us what that version of Leon would be with him now fronting Leon in this Infinite Darkness.
Yeah, I was very excited to see Nick get the opportunity to do an original entry in the series, not just tackle a remake, but something brand new and sink his teeth into that way. For me, it's great. It totally works. He makes a great Leon, of course. And aside from just, adding in the RE4 and the sort of playing off the stuff that's to come, it was cool to see him sort of add some, well, for lack of a better word, like trauma from RE2 in there. Obviously, there's that scene between him and Jason, JJ's lookalike, where they're talking about where they're
first unofficial. Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's exactly it. I fully believe that, by the way. Where they're talking about their past experiences with warfare and bioorganic warfare in Leon's case and stuff like that, and how that's quietly affected him inside and stuff like that. That was cool to see Leon get to play this post-incident Leon, where how that's affected him. Steve, obviously I quoted you from Infinite Darkness, so I've probably taken the sort of wind out your sail here, but how do you feel about Leon's portrayal? Have you gone back and watched it since?
I did in preparation for this. I still think he's okay. I think as a blending of the various Leons, as you rightly said, I think it works. I still look forward to seeing Nick reprise the role again, be it in a RE4 remake or something else. I think they did a fantastic job with what they had. And in fact, some of the best scenes in this show, for me, feature Leon. Unsurprisingly, as he is the main character, you'd think this would be a thing. But they're like the quieter scenes where Leon is more... I don't know. It's not all combat, like where he's facing off against Jason in the small burned down house or whatever in China, and then it leads to the world's briefest quick shootout. I love the tension in that scene, but Leon's not really speaking much there. And the fact that at the end of the day, he's torn between basically doing what's right by his friend Claire or doing what's done right by his bosses and his country at the end. And that confrontation, I thought, was a fantastic way to end it, because we don't see Resident Evil characters have much friction and then it stays left unresolved.
Yes.
Yeah? Chris and Leon are, I won't say they're besties by the end of RE6, but they're clearly on reasonable terms. Get the hell out of there, warning him about the missile. He's not trying to get him killed or anything. Whereas, I could see Claire and Leon never speaking again after this.
Yeah.
And I thought that was good.
We didn't talk about it enough, really, on the Infinite Darkness podcast for my taste, but that final scene with Leon and Claire is incredibly intriguing when you consider that we don't have another appearance from them. Out of all the things, you could have predicted from Infinite Darkness, that wouldn't be it. And it certainly helps that we're not really here to dissect Infinite Darkness again, but at least on our side of the fence, we were a little bit unhappy with the fact that it was pretty by the numbers, weren't we? It was kind of like degeneration sort of over again. There wasn't too much to it in terms of a story. It didn't really add too much. But that final scene came out of nowhere. And I agree, that's such an intriguing interaction, because him and Leon don't get a whole lot of screen time together in this. So to have that be their major scene of the series and then walking off in different directions with completely different mindsets is really interesting. I just hope it's something that we get to return to at some point at least. JJ, how do you feel about Leon's interactions with the rest of the cast of Infinite Darkness?
I really enjoyed it. I think for the most part, not entirely. I feel like Nick did a really good job as this more hardened Leon from the Resident Evil 2 remake Leon we have gotten. I feel like pretty much all of the interaction he has here is fantastic. I love that heart-to-heart with Jason about the trauma they've been through. It just really adds a deeper level to Leon's character and shows that, the events that have happened before are leading to where he is today. And this is no fault to Nick. No fault at all to Nick. It's clearly the writing of this game. My least favorite part of the series is his interaction with Claire. It just seems so almost disrespectful to the companionship they've had in previous games, where they work together to survive. Leon thinks of Claire as an equal, and in this movie, he treats her like a younger, annoying sister or somebody to push off to the side. And then at the very end, he makes a pass at her, which is I don't understand that completely. Again, no fault to Nick, but other than that interaction between those two, they do have a moment where they work together, which is very cool. But other than that, I feel like his interaction with everybody else really fits the character well and just adds a little deeper level to the character.
Yeah, that's fair. As much as we like the sort of severing of those two characters at the end with their different ideals, you're completely right about him sort of almost babying her at the beginning. And the pass, as you just said, is a bit weird. That did kind of come out of nowhere. I'm sure the shippers were very happy about that, but nonetheless, yeah, I tend to agree. Again, not to necessarily wade into Infinite Darkness, but some of his interactions with the characters there, sort of in the second half of it, were just meh. I wasn't really interested in what's her name. Shen Mei, was that it? I wasn't really.
Yeah.
I didn't feel anything between them particularly interesting. and that's about. He was just kind of bouncing around, so I didn't feel like he had beyond that stuff early with Jason. Beyond that, he didn't really get too much of a chance to really have much of a, I don't know how to describe it, a character off with people, really sort of clash some personalities together or push some personalities together, because once you get halfway through that show, it just starts pinballing around. So it's nice that it gets an end point. In terms of performance, I was happy. In terms of voice, actor choice, I was happy. It's fine, I think, is my general.
Yeah.
It's decent. It could have been a hell of a lot worse.
Yeah, I think that was my review of it too. It's like, yeah, it was fine. Nothing amazing and nothing terrible. It's fine.
All right. Well, Steve, any more thoughts on ID before we move on?
Yeah, to sum up my thoughts on ID is it's walking into a minefield, really, because it's for everything I like about it, there's things I don't. But overall, Leon is consistent with the Leon that came before, except for portrayals with Claire, and again the severing of the. I still see it as it's an easy way to say why Leon is not even remotely present in Revelations 2 to help Claire out. They've had a rift build from this whole situation, and that's a good thing for me. I like characters coming into conflict, and otherwise it's adequate.
Okay. Well, let's move along then to the second CGI film, where I may feel slightly different about this one. Resident Evil Damnation, which again I believe takes place a year after Infinite Darkness. The first appearance of Matt Mercer in the role of Leon. Same year as Resident Evil 6's release, but earlier in the year, so I don't know what he recorded first, but this came out first at least. And this is Leon's interactions in the Eastern Slav Republic. Before I sort of get into my opinion, I'm going to throw it to you guys. JJ, how do you feel about Leon in Resident Evil Damnation?
Okay, so I'm going to give my thoughts on it when I first seen it, and honestly, I really enjoyed Leon's performance in this movie, and I don't know if I enjoy it more than what it deserves for the fact that we were coming off a degeneration, and I was so happy to see character added to Leon. Especially, it was a character that I felt like fit the character well as to where he was. Yes, he has a lot of trauma. He's been through a lot, but he has personality. He had more to him than we've seen in degeneration, and I think that just made me happy to the point where I liked it, more so than maybe it deserves, but it's been a little bit since I watched that one. So overall, I enjoyed it, and it was definitely a step forward from Damnation.
Yeah, I mean that's fair. I can't disagree with that.
Sorry, a step forward from Degeneration. My bad.
Yeah. Oh, that's true. That is a factual statement. I don't think it's much better.
Yeah.
I don't. The thing about, we haven't really waded into the CGI films. We haven't really given them their time in the sun yet. But Damnation, I always felt like it was more focused on the new characters, and Leon's just kind of there. Like, anyone could be in this role. I think that's my main problem. I get, they picked Leon. Leon is hyper popular, and especially in Japan, I think he's come up on polls as the most popular Resident Evil character for the Japanese audience. But nothing about this story is improved in any way with it being Leon. When we talked about Ada earlier this year, this is the most inconsequential appearance for her, and thus you could take her out and you could swap anyone in for Leon. I don't think it would have made a difference who was in this role, because he's just the chiseled 5 o'clock shadow action hero of generic proportions in this. Almost as dull as Degeneration. Not quite, but I really couldn't give a monkeys. The only time Damnation particularly gets interesting for me is sort of the last third, where all the tyrants pop out and all the cool stuff happens, but that's got nothing to do with Leon's character. So, Steve, thoughts on Leon's character, or perhaps lack thereof, in Damnation?
Feels like they borrowed a lot from the Jason Bourne films. In particular, or something like that. Maybe James Bond, but for some reason we're in the Eastern Slav Republic and bioweapons instead of spies and all that gadget nonsense. He does feel like a spare part I actually do like tired, I wanted to be on holiday, why have you dragged me out here? As a general character conceit that he just doesn't want to be here. And his character arc is he goes from not giving a damn to giving a little bit of a damn. So that's okay. And the only really standout moment for me is the fact that he could have just shot Buddy and killed him, as he's turning into this plaga monster thing. But no, he severs his spine and cripples him, but also saves his life so he can do something useful. Other than that, it could have been anyone, couldn't it? It could have been Chris. It could have been Ark Thompson. It could have been Billy Cohen. And it wouldn't have mattered. Not really. Which is harsh because it's Leon. It's our boy. He's the center focus of this podcast, for God's sake. And it doesn't feel like he's really even that much of a focus in Damnation, despite being on the front cover.
Yes. It's funny that...
he's just a Spec Ops guy.
Right, exactly that, It could have been a brand new character if you really wanted. Obviously, that's definitely not the way that you want to go with it. I think it's funny because when we did I think it must have been when we talked about RE4, Adam said that RE4 might even benefit from swapping out Leon and putting Billy Cohen in and instead of Leon. And then obviously, when they're making Infinite Darkness, it comes out that they thought about putting Leon in that role instead, Billy in Leon's place in that. But Billy would be a great fit for this. It just seems to become... We just seem to be obsessed with swapping Leon out for Billy. That would be interesting because at least it's a character we've never seen before. But by this point, Leon's been in a lot of stuff. So he's got a lot of appearances to contend with. I would be hard-pressed to find someone I think that this is their favourite Leon performance. But JD, how do you feel about Leon's interactions with Buddy and company?
Yeah, again, now going after listening to you guys talk about it, maybe I'm giving this role too much credit. I'm literally going off of my thoughts first seeing it after the original. Yeah, and I was just happy that he had more character. But what you're saying is true. I do got to watch it again. But no, I remember liking the interaction he had with the other characters. Yeah, it was a bit cheesy, I guess, some of the characters in this, but again, Resident Evil, the original games had their cheese, and I did enjoy that. But I just remember having a fun time with this movie and their performance and the characters in it. I remember, enjoying seeing a lot of this stuff, and maybe it was just seeing Ada and Leon together that made me like it. But I remember enjoying it, but I guess I do have to go back and watch that and really kind of see how it holds up.
Okay, fair enough. Steve, any more thoughts on sort of interactions with Buddy and company, as I've apparently decided to dub it? Mostly because I can't remember. I can't remember the other characters' names. That's probably why.
See, that's the thing. Leon doesn't really give away much. He's just like at first captured Spec Ops dude, and then sort of converted, sort of not to their side. And JD is more of a foil against that stoicism. I think it's not as bad in Degeneration as it was. I think everybody in the room would like to have seen Leon and Ada share a bit more screen time, where they actually talk a bit more and less shooty move on, which is fine. It's if Degeneration is a D, this is a C. Yeah, it's a little better, but it's not a lot better. Yeah,
that's fair. I think when you brought up JD, I think some of those scenes are kind of fun, I suppose. But Leon playing sort of like the straight man in that role with JD's sort of wackiness is, I don't know, it just seems a bit out of place for me, considering, again, maybe it's just the holdover from RE4 where it's like, we had a little bit of personality in that. It's all melting away very fast, especially if you're taking out Infinite Darkness, which hadn't released at this point. We just had Degen and Damnation. And yeah, he's just kind of ultimately completely stoic and not all that interesting in it. So let's move on to the other 2012 release. There's probably quite a lot to say about this one. So in 2013, Adam Benford informed Leon of his desire to reveal to the world the full truth behind the US government's involvement in the Raccoon City incident. He believed that by publicly admitting the part they played and the mistakes committed, it would convince others to do the same and unite nations together to combat bioterrorism. Initially, Leon was hesitant but trusted Benford implicitly and stood by his side. Unbeknownst to Leon and Benford, National Security Advisor and leader of the family, Derek Simmons, took drastic steps to ensure this speech would never be heard. Simmons believed revealing the truth about the government's collusion with Umbrella would only result in catastrophic distrust in the US and destabilize global security. The family orchestrated a bioterror attack on Tall Oaks, which killed Adam Benford and infected the entire area with the C virus. Leon came across Benford's zombified corpse and was forced to put him out of his misery, and thus we have stepped into Resident Evil 6, and every time I forget how weird Resident Evil 6 is, I then remember it starts with Leon shooting the zombie president.
Yeah.
Which, that's a thing that starts the game, basically. Okay, so, we've got Leon, we've got a new character, Helena Harper, to act off of. We've got Adam Bedford, who would obviously sort of be retroactively added into the lore, and Simmons. So there's a fair amount of new pieces to talk about with this one. Steve, how did you feel about Leon's portrayal in RE6? We didn't really talk about Matt Mercer's work in Damnation. So I suppose... I would agree with that.
Initial impressions, by the way, young Steve playing RE6 for the first time. Why is Leon hesitating in front of a zombie? It doesn't matter who it is, but we get past that as we get older. Overall, I actually enjoy it. I think there's an edginess to Leon, as he's now kind of been cut off by his paymasters, and he's sort of working against the government, but trying to circle it back round to catch them. And initially, he's like a detective, trying to piece the pieces together and trying to figure out if he can trust Helena, and I really like that. And then he goes from being that to a kind of like a hard-boiled cop who's trying to get their man, which is Simmons. Obviously, the secret agent going to China, shooting all these zombies and stuff. Yeah. But as an actual personality, he comes across more like a cop than he did in RE4 at all. Like, I know he never was a detective. He was meant to be like a SWAT guy or something, right? But there's more policeman in him than secret agent in this one, and I like that a lot about it.
That's a really good point. I hadn't even really considered that, but that's very astute. That it does almost feel detective-y, cop-like, that kind of thing. I hadn't even considered that, but you're totally right. And also, Leon's sort of, and he's never really been an outwardly emotional character, but having to him sort of calmly act off of some hot-headed characters like Helena and Chris. Obviously, that scene with Leon and Chris is pretty much used to sell the game.
And
it's a great scene. Like, I really like calm Leon, who's got a bit more information about what's going on, because, Steve, as you said, he's sort of figuring things out. He's doing the detective thing, playing off of Chris's rage and his very accurate to his character sort of nature of rushing into things. He's got some really cool scenes. I think his character in this is definitely different, but it feels a lot more like Leon than most certainly the first two CGI films. JJ, how do you feel about Leon's portrayal in RE6?
Okay, so while I have many complaints of Resident Evil 6, that's not necessarily what we're here to talk with.
Sure.
One thing I do say to this day, a very strong point for that game is the characters. Their acting is fantastic. But just the characters, their stories through this game is incredible. And honestly, I think this is one of the strongest portrayals of Leon Kennedy. And it's exactly where I would picture that young rookie cop from the original game, where he would be today with the line of work he is in. Yes, and I agree. Very much a lot of detective work. At the very beginning of the game, he is shooting the president, which I felt was a very intense sort of way to start the game. Like,
sure.
Holy crap, we know Leon, his job has always been to protect the president, and obviously it's not the same president that is in Resident Evil 4, but now he is shooting him in the head, and it looks like he just killed the president. So at the very beginning of the game, you have to prove yourself as why you did it, you know what I mean? And you're uncovering this mystery throughout the game. And again, say what you will about the game itself, I really enjoyed Leon's portrayal in this game.
Yes, I think, again, this is sort of what we were saying about the remakes. It's just a Capcom quality thing at a certain point. Characterization just, and maybe it started with RE. I think perhaps from RE5 onwards, I got really not a lot of complaints about characterization and stuff like that. And yeah, they did a fantastic job with it. Whatever you think of various aspects of RE6, maybe even its plot, but its characterization is pretty strong indeed. How do we feel about his interactions with others? Because there's a lot of characters going on here. Many people, including myself, always had the belief that Helena Harper should have been Angela Miller, but there you go, from Degeneration. That would have been nice. But, their partnership...
We say that. None of us mentioned Angela at all when we were talking about Degeneration.
Yeah.
And their interaction with Leon.
I guess that's true.
They share a voice actress, which is nice.
I guess that's true. But I like little connections like that would be nice, whatever the case. I think that out of all of the partnerships from the game, perhaps we should start here. Sherry and Jake, Chris and Piers, Leon and Helena are probably the weakest. Does that necessarily make it a weak partnership? Steve, what do you think about their sort of pairing?
It's the weird one, right? Because they have the most to lose, because Leon doesn't trust Helena at the start, and they have to go through this journey together to get the evidence, and then they're both cut loose and have to fight up against Simmons. So technically, they should have the most interesting one, but I'd say Sherry and Jake's juxtaposition, followed by Pierce trying to get Chris to sort his head out, it's a more compelling take.
Yeah,
That being said...
Oh, go on.
Okay. That being said, I feel like it has the most room to grow. They just don't get chance to. And the best scenes with Leon are when he's interacting with the other pairs, with like Sherry and with Chris.
Yes, I agree with that. I think it is... It's tough to say whether it is outright weak or just weak by comparison. I think it's adequate, it's fine. The idea of these two sort of been thrust together and forced to deal with it, because at the beginning of the game, they don't know... I guess Helena knows Leon, but he has no idea what's going on. That's quite an interesting take, and it works, but it's definitely overshadowed by the others. JJ, how do you rank the sort of like three relationships of these duos of playable characters? Is Leon and Helena at the bottom for you?
Well, okay, so one thing I want to say before I get into ranking them is... Leon is more of a person, a real person in this game. You know, if you're comparing him to 4, where he's more of a character, which for that game it fits very well. But he's more of a real person in this, and I think that's what lends to the very epic moments we get to see in this game. Some very strong highlights. I do think that I enjoyed. Personally, my favorite is Chris and Piers' story. I feel like the arc there is the best. Yeah. Going back and just watching the cutscenes, it feels like you're watching a movie. I also feel like, Jake and Sherry was incredibly strong. Sherry is our first time seeing her back, and Jake, the son of Wesker, it was so cool to see. And I think out of the three, yes, Leon and Helena's is probably the weakest, but that is, again, I think that it was still, I really enjoyed it. I like Helena as a companion character. I felt like their dialogue together was great, but it's really outshined by the moments of Leon finally seeing Sherry after so many years. Leon finally meet, and correct me if I'm wrong, this is the first time Leon and Chris meet in person. And
in terms of on screen, it's the first time that we see it. Yeah.
Yes, on screen, and just to see them, like you said, Leon is more calm and collective, a secret agent with the moves, and Chris is just a powerhouse coming in, and it's just so cool to see them, meet each other and be like, oh, wait, we're both, you don't kill Ada, there's something else going on here, and just to see them work together, but also, like, disagree. I just felt like there was a lot of moments in here that were highlights of the series, as far as Leon's interaction with other characters. And again, my least favorite of the three, but still very well told. And Leon, like I said, feeling more like a real person really helped elevate these interactions with these other characters.
That's fair. I think that we're pretty much all in agreement with that one. And you're right about him being more like a person and less like a character. It's a great way to put it. From a distance, especially if you were to compare it to RE4, but in general, I think it's easy to say that he doesn't show a ton of emotion in this one. But when you actually watch it and study it sort of in the context of everything, it works really well. Matt Mercer's performance, I think he makes a really good Leon in general. Damnation
would be
is a
It would
struggle.
be bad
But
not to say this, but we say he doesn't show much emotion. He literally does do a sacrifice leap to try and save Ada from being murdered by Simmons. And
I think it amps up
that
as it
seals
goes.
the ship thing, doesn't it? Like there is more. I'll say there's more romance from both sides, despite the fact they don't do like any kissing or all that in this game. And I especially love the little parting shot where she's sending him a message and then just buggering off into the flames.
Yeah.
But that sacrifice leap says a lot about his character. That anything could be going on, but if Ada's in trouble, I'm going to throw myself straight at the problem and hope for the best.
Right, and also particularly what I love about that is where you start the game to that point. I actually really like that Leon. So you're in the university is a particular thing that comes out to me, and you get that father and daughter that you come across before it goes horribly wrong. What I like is you get Leon still trying to save people where he can, and then when he knows it's too late, calmly dispatching them and just getting on with it, which obviously years of experience of dealing with this kind of thing. But it's nice to see him at least trying to make a difference, and then firing when it's ask questions and then shoot later, maybe kind of situation. And it doesn't go so far as Damnation, where he almost comes off as kind of miserable. There's that sort of kind-hearted, do what's right thing that we were talking about right at the beginning in there. So, identifiably Leon is a strong one. It's certainly a strong one. As I said, I think Matt Mercer makes a really good Leon, and this is where he really gets the chance to shine at it compared to Damnation.
Completely agree.
Okay, cool. Any more thoughts on RE6, JJ, as particular Leon's portrayal and interactions?
No, nothing that I think I said my thoughts on it. I'm pretty sure I covered everything that I think about Leon in Resident Evil 6.
Cool. Steve, any more?
Other than that stuff about Ada, I mean, could you argue he's the most ancillary or the most integral? RE6's campaigns are kind of interchangeable as to who's the main character, because obviously there's 3-4 campaigns. Leon's it depends what you want out of it, and I think that's a testament to that minefield of a controversial topic that is RE6.
Sure.
But as a character, Leon is very much the Leon we know, and I think that deserves a lot of bonus points, because no offense to Degeneration and Damnation, but you've gone a bit far off the beaten track in comparison. And
also, now that you mention it, Degeneration and Damnation runtime is what, like an hour and a half each, probably, maybe 1 hour 45. RE6 is so convoluted with all these different characters and storylines that weave together, and they still manage to write everyone well, really, at least to some standard, but particularly like the integral cast. How can that be? Like, I'm sure, obviously, they have different staff, and RE6 was the focus, but it's very drastically different, isn't it?
Yeah.
All right, so let's roll on to the final canonical appearance of Leon up to this point. Last little bit of lore. In late 2013, Leon supervised an operation to arrest a leading senator named Stephen Eyre, who was confirmed to be selling classified secrets to bioterror organizations. But before they could make the arrest, Eyre was forewarned, and instead 3 DSO agents were killed after a bomb was planted in their SUV. But before they could make the arrest, Eyre was forewarned, and instead 3 DSO agents were killed after a bomb was planted in their SUV. Leon was not in the vehicle at the time and was the only survivor. The next day he visited the morgue where the bodies of his team were kept. There he began to get depressed and began reflecting on the kind of person he wanted to be when he grew up. When one of the bodies began to reanimate through viral infection, Leon shot it dead. He requested an extended leave of absence and checked himself into a rural retreat in the Canadian Rockies, where he would remain for over 4 months. He became totally disillusioned with his life and the seemingly never-ending fight against bioterrorism. He was convinced he was stuck in an endless loop. So quite a dark turn to bring us up to Resident Evil Vendetta, where, of course, we get Chris and Leon again, this time joined by Rebecca. Chris and Rebecca seeking out Leon for some extra intel, and they find him drinking in a bar. So, on the table, let's go straight out there that I've always had sort of issues that Vendetta's story with Leon pretty much mirrors some of that we just had from RE6 Chris. When he gets amnesia and he becomes a sort of like sad drunkard, and we have to build him back up a little bit and bring him back round into the fight. It's a shame that we go through a very similar thing with Leon here. But what I will say is when you put all these things in a list, it does make sense. You know, we've seen wide-eyed, wet behind the ears Leon sort of involved in bioterrorism over the last 20 years or so. And at this point, it's really starting to affect him. So we have, at least to some degree, quite a different Leon by this point. Steve, what are your thoughts on Leon in Vendetta?
This is a bit of a minefield because Vendetta itself is unsurprisingly a bit of a mess as well. But I actually do like Matt Mercer's take on Leon. I would argue his trauma is slightly different from Chris's.
Sure.
In that, yes, he lost his team, but he doesn't have the privilege of, say, amnesia and forgetting it and then getting emboldened with rage. He's just generally bloody sad and worn out, which is fine. You know, he's been through literal hell to get to this point, and seen him at the end of a bottle. And the only reason he's motivated is from the person who set him up. Well, one of the people who set him up, giving them a phone call from their family as they've just died to save his life. So he's kind of like motivated to help in the strangest possible way, and I don't think he really gets over it. You know, if it completely out of left field, but if Leon were to take a villain turn at the end of this film, I could see why. You know, the way they're portrayed, there's a certain darkness to them. You know, aside from murdering a highway for 2 dogs,
right?
Which is just over the top action. But there's something about the way they speak and the disillusionment. You know. It makes me wonder and worry for him. It's definitely like they talk about the drone strike on the wedding, and obviously with Glenn Arias attacking the living daylights out of the United States, you kind of know who ordered the drone strike. So he might be disillusioned with his government, and that's an interesting take for his character. Again, you know, Leon with the diversive stuff. If they go with it, they might not.
It does make you wonder, doesn't it? Because obviously this film is now about 4 years old or so, and this is the most recent appearance. So in a way, it is a sour note to kind of end things on, but it could also potentially be an interesting, intriguing thing. And we do seem to be getting some a series of entries that kind of are starting to pick away at the US government's involvement and everything, and kind of say, hey, these guys have been villains this entire time. Which, if you sort of bury yourself in the lore, you know some of the awful stuff that they've been up to in the Resident Evil universe. But Leon, as you said, like explicitly, essentially calls it out when he says, "Who's the bad guy? Is it the guy getting revenge, or is it the guy who dropped the bomb on this dude's wedding?" It is interesting. Of course, we have to touch on the fact that he's relentlessly murdering people on a highway, which is very weird. I suppose there's more issues to do with the film than anything. JJ, how do you feel about Leon in Vendetta?
While it raises some interesting topics, some interesting things that the character is going through, I have to say that this is personally one of my least favorite interpretations of Leon Kennedy.
Right.
And I say that because a lot of this feels out of character. His regard for others seems to be set to the side for the sake of action. And it's at no fault to Matt and his performance as Leon. I feel like he did a good job. And to, you know, the fact that, yes, Leon has been through a lot. And I personally also could see him going down this road. It makes sense. It just, Leon as a character, I think, stands for more. Whereas Chris had gone through this in Resident Evil 6, and, you know, obviously we got to see why he was going through this. He's been through a lot, and to me personally, it fit his character, but it just didn't fit for Leon. It's like that at the heart of Leon, he's good. He wants to do the right thing, whereas he has always been a bit naive to what the right thing is. He felt like his heart was in the right place. Where this movie, I don't know. I just don't see that in his character. And again, you know, a lot of it was disregarded for the sake of action. But that's my personal thoughts on Leon in this movie.
Yeah.
It infuriates me every time he's on a motorbike in this film, which is strange because I love motorbikes. But every time Leon's on a motorbike, you know he's going to do something either irrational, stupid, or just violent for the sake of violent.
Yeah.
Like, you know, the highway scene, and that upsets a lot of people, which is, you know, I can get it. You don't blow up an entire highway for 2 zombie dogs, do you?
No.
Yeah. And then
it's so out of character and it's so out of step with everything else that the series has done beforehand. Like, you can very easily, it's very easy, let's say RE6 in particular, to just point and go, it's just a big dumb action game. Okay, that might be true to some extent, but it never went this far where it's, utter nonsense, disregard.
Merciless innocence, yeah.
Absolutely.
And Chris, by comparison, the same film, Chris doesn't do anything that extreme towards innocence. Obviously, these are infected people trying to bite him. You've got to put them down. But he's not riding a staircase with a motorcycle driving straight over them and then launching it around. It's on the nose. If they want to put like Chris is good guy and then Leon is the bad guy, he doesn't play by the rules, but he's also on the side of good. It's an odd juxtaposition, and I don't really care for it.
Yeah,
agreed. Definitely agree. And to that, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, JJ.
I just completely forgot, and what you just said reminded me, in Infinite Darkness too, there was a bit of moments there with a disregard that really stood out, and I'm sorry to jump back to that, but it kind of goes in line with where in the episode where the zombies are invading the White House, Leon does kills a bunch of them, and then he's like, asshole, and I just like, really? You probably knew some of these people, you probably worked with them, and throwing it back to that, but kind of on the onto Vendetta, where he has disregard for others, and that doesn't seem like Leon to me.
Yeah, I guess it obviously depends on where you want this character to sort of be framed as. Like, I can get behind the idea of him being disillusioned by all this and the idea that it's going round an endless loop. It's almost kind of like poking fun at the fact that, Resident Evil has been doing similar things for a long time now. We get these lots of self-contained... Just looking at the films, right? Just these self-contained stories about a new BOW strain or a new bioterrorist and Leon having to deal with it. It's not meant to be a commentary on that, but it is kind of funny in that way. But I get that, and I can understand that, and that makes sense to me. But perhaps if you're looking at Leon as sort of almost being... the core of Leon of this, this guy that's looking out for other people, and more than anything, just a little bit of hope, more than anything else. In this, even when he comes back, as you guys said, when he comes back to the forefront of the action, that hope's not there. The disregard and the violence kind of overrides the true Leon in this. It's a very strange one.
Yeah.
How do we feel about Leon's interactions with others in this? Nothing really stands out too much to me. It is bizarre, perhaps, to go from... I don't hate it outright, but it is bizarre to go from hothead Chris in RE6 and calm Leon to sort of Chris trying to go the other way around and calmly pull Leon out before he snaps. It's cool to see Leon and Rebecca together, and we talked about it when we talked about Rebecca. Rebecca put them both in their place, but there's not a lot of beyond that. I guess he doesn't really interact with too many other characters in this film. Steve, any thoughts?
Yeah, no, you're right. I don't think Leon even says anything to Rebecca outside of that scene. Most of his dialogue is shared with Chris, where he basically is he's expositionally explaining various things like, this is how the virus works, this is what we should do. Right. Okay, what we're going to do, boss. And that's it. Which is a shame. It's a real shame, because I think Matt Mercer did try. You can tell,
totally.
There is a distinct change in the way that they are portraying Leon, which is consistent in the kind of portrayal he had in 6. It's just, this is now Leon, but he's mega sad.
Yeah.
And that's it. Chris is okay, actually. I think, complete side point, but Kevin Dorman is a bit geeky in the way he comes across to me, but upbeat Chris is kind of cool to juxtapose against the sad Leon man and Rebecca. Until Arius is mentioned, then Chris is a hothead as well. But
yeah. JJ, thoughts on Leon's dialogue when it comes to dealing with others in this?
Yeah, I guess dialogue I don't have too much on. It does kind of feel like Chris and Leon maybe switched roles in this. I don't know. I feel like they kind of missed the mark. Yeah, for both the characters. But I do have to say that since this is very action heavy, it is cool to see Chris and Leon working together, all the years of experience they have in this one moment where we get to see them. Chris using his brute force to just pile drive zombies, while Leon is like very John Wick style. Again, super over the top action, but it is cool to see Chris and Leon work together. And I have to say, out of this entire movie, seeing Chris and Leon work together was probably a highlight. But again, one of my least favorite interpretations of Leon.
All right, that's fair. I can completely understand that. So that actually brings us neatly to the final point, I suppose, which is now we kind of need to reveal the scale here. Like, what is the worst Leon appearance and what is our favourites? Steve, what's at the bottom of the pile for you? Is it going to be Degeneration?
Oh God, yeah, it has to be. It has to be. You know, it's nice that the plank from Ed, and Eddie gets work, but otherwise, no. Yeah, Degeneration followed by Vendetta.
Yeah. God, it's. I mean, yeah. Put them all in a big sack. You know, they're all just miserable. Honestly, even if parts of the film are good, Leon's character in them is either dull or worse. JJ, what's right at the bottom for you?
Completely agree. It goes Degeneration, then Vendetta. Yeah, I have to say that I agree.
That's fair.
For my least there. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, well, we're all in agreement there. Let's talk about the top, which, you know, could be a similar situation. JJ, I'm going to throw to you first. Is this a difficult decision to make, or is your mind already settled?
My mind is made up. It's set. And I'm going to be completely honest. Nostalgia 100% plays into my decision. And that's just what it is. This is my decision. The original Leon Kennedy, portrayed by Paul Haddad, the performance that started it all, what he brought to the character, the hero I looked up to as a kid, that is my favorite interpretation of Leon. He set who that character is, what he stood for, and really paved the way going forward. So that's my favorite Leon Kennedy.
The writing is great. The design is great. Paul's performance is perfect. I'd be hard pressed to argue with that one. Steve, what's number one for you?
Don't make me choose.
No, I'm gonna make you choose. If I made Hope choose, you get to have to choose.
It wouldn't be appropriate to pick anyone other than Paul Haddad, with good reason. They made the character their own. They set the foundation from which everything else has come forth. And, you know, if anyone was to play anything like, you know, it's Quicksilver in the X-Men cartoon and so on, anything else with him in, you'll only hear Leon. And then any character, you know, putting their own stamp on the character, you still kind of wonder how Paul Haddad's take would have been. And for that, there's a legacy there that will never be tarnished. You know, cheesy, yes. Is it a bit silly at times? Yes. It's always endearing. And nostalgia is playing a massive factor, but much like JJ, Leon is, and well, was and is one of my heroes, especially the 98 era one. So, yeah, I like it. The part of me was still kind of gutted we didn't get him back for RE4. It's a great sadness, you know, with Paul Haddad passing away. But I'm glad that the community managed to get in touch with him and let him know how much he is appreciated, because that would have shattered my heart in two if that never happened.
That's exactly what I was going to say. Actually, is I'd like. That's a nice, warm feeling, isn't it? That he got to have that sort of, in a way that a lot of the voice actors over the years have come forward and realised that they're, you know, something they did in the past that perhaps they didn't think too much about, is beloved by all these people. For Paul to have that experience is just wonderful. There's not much more you can say than that. Yeah, I agree that it would be really interesting to see what his take in RE4 would be like. I'd love to hear that voice sort of kicked up, you know, brightened up a bit. If we're doing crazy fun RE4, it'd be really interesting to see Paul Haddad's direction for that. That being said, I think Paul Mercier did an incredible job with RE4. Despite our complaints about the sudden change of character, what he was given to work with, there's a reason that a lot of people will think of that voice first, and a lot of the lines and the delivery that he gave on those oh so cheesy lines So that is a very, even as someone who doesn't hold RE4 in quite the same regard as the general gaming masses, that's a very strong number 2. Because number 1, I completely agree with both of you. You know, nostalgia blinds me slightly, I'm sure. But the range in 1998 RE2 Leon is astounding for the time. And just going back and like picking up new things that I love about it endlessly, even to today. So yeah, always going to be my favorite. You know, my favorite Leon is always going to be naive cop Leon. I like that we've moved away from that and grown the character. But that will always be my personal favorite. I guess one last question before we wrap, just real quick. JJ, as a big Leon fan, what would be your hopes? And let's say that you would allowed to write something for Leon Vendetta, like post Vendetta, so Leon's next canonical experience. Any thoughts on how you'd like him reintroduced and where we're at?
Oh man, I have a lot of fan fiction in my head. You know, it's strange because as much as Leon is my favorite character, to how do I want to put this? I feel as if the character started and is the story of Chris, Claire, Jill, Leah. Like, there's so many characters and there's so many open ends to this, and I would just love to see that in their older age, they come to realize that, you know, it's their last mission, right? They're getting older. They want to continue fighting, but they also have to understand that, you know, it's never, how do I want to put it, that they're getting older and it's becoming more difficult. And to see these characters have their last hurrah and sort of set up, then, you know, after post that game, whatever that game would be, to see them all come together, all the survivors that have battled through the years, you know, Barry, Chris, Jill, Leon, Claire, to come together to form some organization that is ran by these original members, to continue fighting bioterrorism, but, you know, through politics and through, you know, funding and charity, to see their stories kind of go that way. Obviously that wouldn't be fun to see in a game, but just as like a way to conclude these characters, to send these characters off happy. Maybe Ada retires and Leon and Ada get married and have kids. It sounds cheesy, but come on, that would be pretty nice to see a young Kennedy there. I don't know. I just think that if they were to come together in another game, they just work together. You get to see that good side of Leon trying to help, you know, with all the years of experience he's had since, and they wrap up with a really nice send off of a foundation to continue competing because, you know, they're getting older.
So, I don't know. I mean, I completely understand. I imagine a lot of people are with you in the sense that they want these characters to have a happy ending at some point and just get to retire. You know, whether or not Capcom would even go so far as to start pairing characters off and having them have families on screen, I would highly doubt that, but at least give them sort of fans the opportunity to know that possibility is out there. For me, I'm going to go a dark route here.
Oh, okay.
It's funny in particular that you mentioned Batman, because it's a great allegory for where I'm going with this. But for those of you who have seen my video that we put out a little while ago about Resident Evil The Next Generation, where I was talking about what characters need to take up the mantle and move forwards, I said there was an earlier draft of the script where it was way too long, but I spent a lot of time thinking about, you know, where these sort of the 4 pillars of these characters, Chris, Claire, Jill, and Leon, should end up. And I think out of anybody that is going to work themselves to the point where they don't get a happy ending anymore, that's probably going to be Leon. Like, that drive for justice and a never-ending battle against bioterrorism. I could almost see him in a very The Dark Knight kind of way be immortalized by all the great things that he's done and dying in the heat of battle or something. And I know that's not what everybody wants, but I think, and that Capcom are never going to kill off a main character. I don't see it happening. This is not a prediction. I just think it would be very bold for them to sort of immortalize, because you are going to have to set these characters down and pick up some new toys to play with at some point, because we don't want to be playing a 70-year-old Chris Redfield. But so, I mean, it's going to happen, isn't it? We know it is.
You're completely right.
But
to have him go down as a martyr.
Right, exactly. And like he spent his entire life, and you immortalize that in this sort of what you were talking about, this sort of like future BSAA kind of like organization, and he goes down as this important figure that sort of set the foundation of this pushback. Maybe bioterrorism is starting to reduce, and he's contributed to part of this pushback, and we can go back to a less action-heavy style of game as well by doing it that way. And yeah, it would be nice for one of the characters to go down that way. I say nice. I think from a storyline perspective, it would be interesting how that would affect other characters as well. But that's just me. I've definitely overthought about these kind of things recently. Steve, you might be able to bookend us with some nice stuff. What would be your thoughts?
I was just busy when you mentioned Batman. I thought, what, are Leon and Ada going to take their child to the cinema and they get gunned down in the street? Like primarily.
Oh my goodness.
My ideal ending for these characters is the cheesy Avengers Endgame approach. Like we do Resi 6 again, but we do it with the right level of action, that right throttle. Give all these characters one final big bad. I don't care if it's super powered alien Wesker from Planet Zod for some reason, still wearing sunglasses. Some big bad for them all to take down together, and then they retire peacefully, and then the next one's rise. Leon, I think it's time for Leon to either pick a side, because they're clearly disillusioned and they're seeing what's happening, and they need to decide, is supporting the government or going against bioterror? Because, like with the BSAA, there's corruption within. And that, I think, needs to come to a head, because they can't keep working for people who they know are dodgy.
Yeah.
Even in Infinite Darkness, it's still a surprising turn, not to backtrack, but the fact that they help cover it up, basically.
Yeah.
And that doesn't strike me as a very Leon move. Overall, though, just bring them out of the misery train back into being a idealistic rookie cop or detective or secret agent, someone with ideals again, as opposed to misery, is the main thing for me.
That's fair.
Completely agree. Yeah, definitely.
All right, well, nothing else remains for me but to thank our contributors. If you'd like to be part of the show, then please look into auditioning for our file readings, join the Discord server to get in touch with members of the team and our community, discuss Resident Evil with us and other fans, and listen to the podcast live as it's recorded. You can find a link to the server, as well as our Twitter, Facebook, Twitch, Instagram, YouTube, and more at faspraypod.com. You can find the podcast on YouTube, Stitcher, Spotify, and iTunes, and if you enjoyed the show, please do leave us a review where you can. It helps spread the word. You can also support the show by picking up some merch or at patreon.com/FASprayPod for as little as $1 a month. In our next episode, we wrap up the third season of First Aid Spray the only way we know how. Steve dons the Quizmaster cap as we sit back and or stress out at Trivia Challenge Round 3. Thank you to the panel. You can follow all of us individually. I'm at Cyniac_123. Steve is at FB Steve Was Taken, and JJ is at JJ from ROE. And finally, thank you for listening and have a good week.
I still love the fact that Rose carrying the torch for Outbreak like all the time. It's I was catching up on highlights of you guys and Sonny beating the what's it called, the sewer scenario.
Oh yeah, Underbelly, I believe.
Yeah.
That was a lot of fun last night. That game's always so much fun, no matter how many times you play it. To come back to with friends, even same friends, different friends, and then replay the same scenarios. To me, it never gets old, and it's always entertaining to play and to watch. That game, that series needs all the love it can get.
Yeah, it's always nice to see people flying the flag, like Steve says. We've not touched it yet. I've never played Outbreak, so we'll get there. Yeah, it'll be very special when we do, because with the fan servers and stuff and being able to play it with people, it's just a matter of we need to do it that way. It needs to be done right, so we're just waiting to make that happen.
I want the authentic UK way, Si, where you're playing with just the bots yelling at you the entire time.
My life is okay.
Your timing sucks,
Yeah, exactly.